Hello, welcome to Only for Your Ears, and today's episode 23, The Marsh King's Daughter, which I've renamed as The Persistence of the Lotus Flower. We'll start off with the summary as usual, where I'll highlight the most important points, where I digress. Then we'll continue with my critical review on how this story plays in today's society, the parallels, for example. And I'll use some of the sentences from the summary to frame my review. And last but not least, I'll point out what the trigger points were, the most important points for me, and how these trigger points affected me and what I have to say about them. So let's begin. The Marsh King's Daughter, The Persistence of the Lotus Flower. The Marsh King's Daughter is a fairy tale by Hans Christian Andersen that tells the story of Helga, a girl born to a Viking chieftain's daughter, and the natural Marsh King. Possessing a dual personality, Helga is a beautiful human girl during the day, but transforms into a hideous frog at night. I digress. Imagine that. A misogynistic king who robs his own daughter of her power. As she grows, Helga displays a wild and cruel temperament, a reflection of her father's influence. I digress. The old adage of the women being evil and a wild beast, like someone that needs to be controlled. However, her life takes a turn when she meets Angzar, a young Christian monk who teaches her the importance of love and compassion. Over time, Helga begins to change as her love for Angzar and the Christian faith help her overcome her darker instincts. I digress. Well, genuine love can transmute anything. Helga and Axnar embark on a quest to save her mother, who has been imprisoned by the Marsh King in the form of a toad. They face various trials and challenges along the way, testing their love and faith. I digress. Whenever you venture onto a noble cause, you always experience challenging times. Eventually, they defeat the Marsh King, rescuing Helga's mother and breaking the curse that made Helga part frog. I digress. Success prevails. Helga's transformation is complete, and she is fully redeemed through her love for Axnar and her newfound faith. The story concludes with Helga and Axnar returning to the Vikings chieftain's home, where they are celebrated and welcomed. They marry and go off on to spread the Christian faith throughout the land. I digress. A good end to this fairy tale, simply because the women reclaimed their power. Lastly, just a reflection, The Marsh King's Daughter is a captivating tale that explores themes of transformation, redemption, and the power of love, the struggle between good and evil. I digress. This is a lifetime challenge and the bane of our existence. Andersen masterfully weaves elements of Danish folklore, mythology, and Christian themes into a rich narrative that resonates with readers of all ages. Well, that's the end of the summary. Very interesting, I say. And the most interesting part is that, as I mentioned, the women get to reclaim their power after being turned into a frog and a toad. Let's go on to my critical review and how this plays out in society or how it parallels with society. Let's begin. This is a wonderful blend of fairy tale and religion, but still contains the fantasy with the faith-based ideas influencing them in general themes in this story. Redemption and forgiveness run deep, just like good and evil are inevitably linked. It starts as early as in families. One child is the favorite, the good, intelligent, and perfect in every way, where the teachers adored your favorite child. Then your second child can never meet your already met expectations with your first child. So he or she has no chance but to be the bad child. That is considered useless. This isn't fair, but this is true. Many of human beings in society have succumbed to society's preconceived ideas projected on by the family unit, and down then the downhill rages into a fiery death for both siblings, or the baddie self-destructs. Let's take a look at my first example. Number one, as she grows, Helga displays a wild and cruel temperament, a reflection of her father's influence. I digress. The old adage of the women being evil and a wild beast, like someone that needs to be controlled. I'm reminded of the film Whatever Happened to Baby Jane. This is a masterful film. A former child star of an early vaudeville known as Baby Jane, Jane was doted upon by her father due to her success on the stage, while Blanche lived in her shadow, neglected. However, their roles were reversed after the death of their parents due to influenza, when both children moved to Los Angeles to live with an aunt. Blanche was favored by directors for her blonde hair and regal beauty, and finally decided to pursue a successful film career. Blanche became a star, while Jane, who was once the star, child star, attempts at making movies always resulted in failure, languished in her shadow. Blanche managed to keep her sister's career alive by having a clause in her contract stipulating that Jane have a role in every film in which Blanche appeared. But these were always minor parts that relegated Jane to the same neglect Blanche had suffered. In the end, the relationship between the two siblings was awful, filled with jealousy and rage. Blanche causes Jane's paralysis in a car crash and admits it to her, and Jane continues to live in the world of a childhood star and never gets to grow up. Blanche has her sister right where she wants her, trapped and nowhere to go but down. This is a typical example of parents or a parent destroying their children's chance of ever becoming the best versions of themselves. Without sounding too preachy, good and evil resides in each and every one of us. And this is something we wrestle with and confront every day. Well, at least I know I did for a really long time until I stopped absorbing people's hateful projections of themselves onto me. And I finally went on to discover who I am, both good and bad, and try to reconcile them both. So I lived with a more balanced person. But I must confess, emotions, personality traits, buried alive, never die. It just finds another avenue to come out and express itself without our permission. So it's really important, people, that we don't get out of balance. We don't say, "Oh, this is my good side is the best side, and so I'll emphasize that, and I'll push the bad side down." Because if you push the bad side down, what it does, it's going to find a way to pop up. If you keep pushing and pushing it down, it's like feelings buried alive never die. And so you keep pushing it down, it will spring up. So what you have to do is say, look, these are my good qualities. I love them. And these are my not so good qualities. But let's see if I can take a good look at these negative qualities or not such good qualities and balance them out. Recognize them, see them for what they are, accept them, and deal with them, manage them in the best way that I can. So I can be a balanced version and the best version of who I am. Okay, so the next one, part of my review is I digress. Whenever you venture on a noble cause, you always experience challenging times. Eventually, they defeat the Marsh King, rescuing Helga's mother and breaking the curse that made Helga part frog. I digress. Success prevails. This is an incredible part of the story because through love, faith, and transmuting both her mother and daughter's karma of having their power whipped out from underneath them. What is great, they use God's magic through themselves, which transpired to empower themselves and defeat the Marsh King without lifting a finger to harm him. Anyway, he built up enough negative karma to destroy himself. This sounds a little bit like Goliath, David and Goliath. David didn't really do much harm to Goliath. I mean, he didn't hit him or anything like that. He used some stones, he used his own tools. But these two women, they didn't even use these rocks to hit him. They just stood in their power. I'm reminded of Oprah Winfrey story when she worked for WJZ in Baltimore. She had been reprimanded by her TV station not to get involved with the general public's personal stories because she had kindly brought some blankets for a family whose house got burnt down. Well, she was at the TV station for 7 months before she was ultimately fired. Oprah has gone on to be one of the most successful Black entrepreneurs in America. She has also opened an all-girls school in South Africa, which demonstrates her willingness to help people. See, what irritated the radio station or the TV station is exactly what Oprah Winfrey went on to do anyway. And that was to use her kindness, to stand in her own power of kindness, in spite of, I mean, she has her negative points too. She has the bad side about her too. But what she's done, she's wrestled with her negative and good side. And she's found a balance. And she's still been able to use her kindness, her compassionate heart, and put it to good use. And she opened up her own business and became an incredible success. I'm sure those people that let her go wish they had kept their mouth shut and held on to her just a little bit longer. But that wasn't the case. The third part, I digress, a good end to this fairy tale, simply because the women get to reclaim their power. Oh, the idea of being able to reclaim your power is, is so incredible. So let's continue. Women reclaiming their power has been a recurring theme through the 20th century and in the 21st century as well. I'm reminded of so many stories of women from the suffragettes to Rosa Parks to Kathleen Johnson, Michelle Obama, and Regina Hartley from a TED talk that I saw, which was so inspiring. Let me tell you about Regina Hartley and standing in her power. Well, Regina is an H&R director. She comes from a very difficult family situation with a parent that was a paranoid schizophrenic. Money was scarce, and they didn't have a fridge, a TV, a phone, all the domestic amenities that needed for the house to really function properly. She was advised early during her career, after she had a job as a singing waitress, that she mustn't let her past hold her back. This was from a woman that used to give her a car ride to work. She said, don't, don't let your past hold you back. In actual fact, let it fuel your progression. But use your childhood to help you grow to the woman you wanted to become or you want to become. And she did. Her TED talk is very inspirational because she goes on to talk about post-traumatic growth and how a lot of people that experience trauma when they were children, and they also maybe experience, in some cases, arrested development, they're not grown. And then after they've overcome the trauma that they experience, that's when they go into rapid growth. And she talks about how, as a H&R director, she talked about these two men that she hired for a job. She said they were both qualified. One went to Hartford, came from Hartford, and he was a good worker, very qualified. And then there was another one that she called the scrapper. One was called born with the silver spoon in his mouth, and the other one was called the scrapper. And the scrapper is somebody that has to pull themselves up by the bootstraps, basically what she had to do, and create her life for herself, be very resourceful. Well, she gives an example of these two workers, And one of them, the one that went to Hartford, she asked him to go downstairs on the factory floor and just do a quick analysis of what the workers were doing. And he said to her, he goes, no, I can't do that. That's beyond my pay grade. That's not part of my job description, and I'm not doing it. So she asked the other one, the scrapper that she calls, to do exactly the same thing. And he said, sure, I'll go down and I'll make an analysis of what the workers were doing. And she said it was interesting because the following week he was in the advertising department because he had to substitute for somebody that wasn't there. And then he went on to be in another department. This man, the scrapper, probably in the end gets to know the whole company inside out and eventually probably became the CEO. Whereas the guy from Hartford, left the company very early on because he wasn't prepared to go the extra mile. And let me tell you, people, going the extra mile is for your benefit and nobody else's necessarily. And a lot of people don't realize that. Everybody just works inside of the box and they work as little as they can, following their job description, just to get the money that they want. And they get offended if you ask them to do anything above the line of the box or outside the box. And the people that are willing to go outside of the box are usually the ones that turn out to be the CEOs or know the company inside out. So Regina Hartley went on to talk about her situation and a Chinese man that also went through post-traumatic growth and did extremely well, got qualified, moved to America, and his two daughters graduated from Yale and Hartford with flying colors. So it's all possible. It depends on what you're really prepared to do and how you do it. Let's take a look at the trigger points that I noticed running through the story and things that affected me. Now we go back to the beginning again. As she grows, Helga displays a wild and cruel temperament, a reflection of her father's influence. I digress. The old adage of the women being evil and a wild beast, like someone needs to be controlled. The idea that women have to be controlled or tamed really bothered me a lot. It reminded me of my mother's need to have control over me, which gave her a sense of power, but left me feeling powerless, just like like narcissists want you to feel. Yes, narcissists always want you to feel incompetent. They always want you to feel powerless. They always want you to believe who they've rendered you to be, which is basically stupid. The film Gaslight demonstrates best how I felt. Ingrid Bergman plays a survivor of a narcissist to her malignant narcissistic husband. He does everything to make her feel stupid, inept, insecure, and totally incompetent. There's nothing that she can do, there's nothing that she can do right. Therefore, this foolish child needs to be controlled and humiliated. By the time her husband has murdered someone in their house, she is convinced it's her to the police. So she goes to the police and she says, I'm so sorry. I don't know how I did it, but I must have killed this man. I can't even remember killing this man. And she's looking at this man, but he's not really looking at her. He looks at her for a moment and he can see the panic and the immense insecurity that this woman's been made to feel. But he slides his eyes to the husband and he hugs the poor woman and he whispers in his ear. He said, I know you think you're crazy. You're not crazy, but your husband is. And in the end, it's quite remarkable because she gets to terrorize him, humiliate him, embarrass him, render him stupid and inept, the same way that he had done to her for years. And she ties him up in the room And she tells him that she knows that he's the murderer. And he admits to her that he is the murderer. And that's when the detective comes in and arrests him. It's quite amazing. You could see the joy, the anger, and the delight in her eyes as she was able to stand in her own power and stand up to this small bullying boy that her husband has always been. It was really, really incredible. So the idea that I needed to be controlled and that certain women, like Ingrid Bergman's character in Gaslight, needed to be controlled is ludicrous. Who needed the control, who needed to feel in control, was the narcissist. And narcissists are the ones that need control because their life, their emotions, their personality is like a wild scrambled egg. It's completely out of control. So they need to go around trying to control anybody if they can. In the end, I was glad to see this woman still had the tendency of being bullied, but she knew how to stand up to the bully, and she knew how to stand in her own power. When it came to my mother, the great point for me was that I was able to stand up to my mother before she died and stand in my own power. And let me tell you, when I was able to do that, I just felt so at peace. And I didn't feel as though I was doing anything wrong. I just felt as though I was standing in my own rightful place. Let's go on to the next trigger. The next trigger is I digress. Whenever you venture on to a noble cause, you always experience challenging times. Eventually, they defeat the Marsh King, rescuing Helga's mother and breaking the curse that made Helga part frog. I digress, success prevails. I'm reminded of a counseling session I attended, and I shared a poem I wrote. Are you willing? This came after I had wrestled with the forgiveness, redemption, and the transmutation of my family karma. I remember how stubborn I was about receiving justice and that I shouldn't be the youngest and yet be the responsible one to do all the healing and changing. I said to my counselor, it's not fair. And she said to me, Melody, no, it isn't fair. I metaphorically gritted my teeth. She agreed and added that something had to give. Both my parents are dead, and I have a very distant relationship with my sister, which was bad, but I chose to take responsibility, even though I wasn't the cause of my family karma. You see, the idea of when you take responsibility for something, it doesn't necessarily mean that you are the cause of the problem. What it means is that you decide to change the situation. You decide through the power that you have in your life, through the power of forgiveness, love, understanding, through the power you possess as a person, the change agent, you decide to change and transmute that situation because you have the power. You know you have the power to do it, but not because you did anything wrong in the beginning. So When you take responsibility for something, it's not always because you are at fault, it is because you have the power and the ability to change something and to heal it, whereas others do not. Even though I wasn't the cause of my family karma, my poem uses my inner child to have the courage to face my fears and take the plunge and do what's right. Yes, thank goodness for the healing that I've experienced through spirit, through God, and through my adorable inner child. My inner child was the one that held my hand, metaphorically speaking, and pulled me towards taking that step to healing some of the family karma that was bearing down on my back, on my sister's back, on my mother's back, on my father's back too. Now, have I healed everything with a magic wand? Absolutely not. But you've got to start somewhere. And I must admit, I thought 100 times better. And I used to want to curse my mother's name and life all the time. I was just so bitter. I hardly ever think about her. And I remember it clearly when I was speaking to my counselor, and I just realized I said something has got to go. And I think through the use of this poem, it helped me reconcile all that bitterness that I had inside of me and overcome so much. And I still have a lot to overcome today. That was a trigger for me. And the trigger is that I've been able to deal with some of these problems. The last part, I digress. A good end to this fairy tale simply because the women get to reclaim their power. Speaking up for myself, when a doctor told me my arthritis in my hands was terrible, I spoke up for myself. Look, I've been in Canada for a while now, not too long, but almost a year, I would say. Yes, a little over a year. I'm going back soon. And I went to go and get a prescription, a medication. My doctor wasn't there, and another doctor was going to come and give me the prescription. Fine. All she needed to do was to write it out. So she called me into her office and she said, yes, I've been reviewing your case. You have a history with this particular thing, with cancer, and you also have a history with arthritis. So I said yes. And she said that one of the medications that I'd take is a little toxic, so maybe another medication might be good. So that's fine. And then, so I was waiting for her to write the prescription out. And then she decided to lean forward, look at my hands, and say, your arthritis in your hands, your arthritis is terrible. And that's when I just said, I've had enough. I proceeded to tell her, I have had enough. Don't you think I know that my hands look quite deformed? Really, really quite deformed. It's clear that I have a deformity in both hands. But where's the soft skills? Don't they teach you how to speak to clients at medical school? It's obvious that they don't. I said, I've really, really had enough. I said, the intense insensitivity is beyond me. You do not know how to speak to people. And then she said to me, well, I thought I was showing my concern by saying that your arthritis was terrible. I said you weren't showing your concern. What you were doing was using a negative adjective and giving your opinion. If you really wanted to promote the new rheumatologist that's at this clinic, you could have just said, I can see that your arthritis is evident, and we just hired a new rheumatologist to take a look at patients that have problems with their joints, arthritis and rheumatoid arthritis in particular. Would you like me to recommend him to your doctor so you can see him? And that would have been so much better, so sufficient. You don't need to make the patient feel so awful. So I took my prescription, I left, I said thank you, and I walked out. And I went upstairs to the place that I was staying at, and I spoke to this woman, and she said, "Oh my goodness, they don't know how to speak to people. It's so ignorant and so unkind." And then I went on and I told my counselor, and she said, "Melody, I am so sorry. This is another time that you've had these insecure women from this country just speak to you so in such a negative way." She said, "But you know what's really good? What's really, really good is that you stood up for yourself." I stood up for myself. I defended myself. I claimed my power. I said, "You cannot speak to me in this way." So while I felt terrible when she said what she said, I was still able to stand up for myself. And I think that was the most important point of this particular trigger. That I was, in spite of the pain that I felt, the emotional pain, not the physical pain. I don't feel any physical pain at all. Touch wood and praise to God. Literally praise to God, because I know there are a lot of hurting souls out there that have rheumatoid arthritis and are in pain every day, every hour. I am one of the lucky ones. I have rheumatoid factor. But I must admit, I felt so much better when my counselor said to me, because Melody, you actually stood up for yourself. So I will finish off this section right there. This is the end of today's episode, The Persistence of the Lotus Flower. And I'd like to thank you very much for listening, very much for your views and your attention. And I'd like to leave with, healing is a lifelong lesson, blessing, and gift we give ourselves, mind, body, and soul. Healing is a lifelong lesson, blessing, and gift we give ourselves, mind, body, and soul. And please be kind. Show me some love. Subscribe, give me a thumbs up, or share. Goodbye, and have a great weekend.